It's me, Mercury. You might remember me from BR Tips with Mercury.
Fuck, I can't hit shit, I'm not scoped!
But in this video, I'm actually going to discuss Halo 3 seriously. This may or may not turn to a recurring segment, depending on the popularity and reception of this video. But anyway, this video is called Halo 3 Combat, and I'm going to briefly discuss a breakdown of an average Halo 3 combat situation. Now, I'm not on an MLG team, so feel free to disregard anything I say. The contents of this video are all according to my personal experience and help me personally play better, so I'm not going to guarantee that this will work for you. But either way, it's an interesting approach. But enough disclaimers, let's get to the good stuff. Alright, I'm going to break down a combat encounter into 3 stages. Now, by encounter, I mean one player seeing another, and I say combat because an encounter could be a sacrifice flag guide, prevent a reset, or any other scenario which doesn't lead to combat. So anyway, the 3 stages are encounter, combat, and endgame. Each stage is determined by the previous stage, obviously excluding the first. Let's focus on encounter. The encounter stage is extremely important. If you've read A New Theory on Gameplay about arrows and angles, the first part of the encounter stage is pretty similar to that. When a player sees another player, that instant determines the initial balance, or the likelihood of either player being killed, of the fight. So say you're the second person, the one being challenged. If your enemy is right in front of you, the balance is even, and neither player has an advantage. Now, imagine that your enemy is diagonally to the left or right of you. Your opponent has the advantage in this situation, as it'll take more time for you to put him in your sights. If your enemy is behind you, your enemy has a huge advantage. Now, there are exceptions to these 3 zones. If one player is obviously better than the other, the combat balance is different. Being attacked from one behind at close range could easily turn into a ninja or a position switch where you're suddenly behind them. Note that each player's weapon also plays the largest role in this first step. This is also where distance factors in. Someone with a mauler attacking from someone from the sides or from behind at close range will instantly tip the balance to their favor, often winning instantly. The same can be said for sniper rifle at long range to the sides or behind. Use common sense to determine the advantage of each weapon against one another weapons at various differences. Remember that stage 1 affects stage 2. The combat stage starts when the first shot is fired or the first beatdown is thrown. This determines the other half of balance and is where player skill makes most evident influence. Having a teammate in this stage will greatly sway the odds in your favor. The stage is mostly self-explanatory, and it is usually the longest. Keep in mind that the combat stage may be non-existent. If one player does not return fire, the fight skips to stage 3, and if a kill occurs right as an encounter is made, neither stage 2 or stage 3 occur. It's a dynamic system that can be adapted to different scenarios. The endgame stage is usually the most difficult to determine. What I mean by endgame is the events that occur when one player realizes that they're going to lose and reacts to this realization. In an even fight, combined with determination and being unfamiliar with the game, stage 3 may not occur. In simpler terms, if both players think they're going to win, the endgame won't happen. Usually the endgame is very brief. Examples of the endgame may include, but are not limited to, throwing a grenade, running, hiding, charging recklessly, etc. But basically, it's any action that is suddenly and dramatically different than the actions leading up to this point. Note that being the losing player at the endgame stage does not necessarily mean that you will die. You could escape long enough to recharge your shields, at which point you could either disengage or re-engage. You could also kill the other player, most often through well-placed grenades and clever corner jukes. The phrase one shot refers to this stage. Now that you understand each stage, let's focus on what you can do to utilize this knowledge. Pertaining to stage 1, there are several tips that I can offer. First off, always be aware of where each of your zones lie. If your sides or back are facing a commonly walked area, you should rethink your position. Always be aware of the most likely direction and distance in which you would encounter an enemy, and plan your weapon selection and direction accordingly. Increasing your sensitivity will decrease the amount of time it takes to aim at enemies that are flanking you, thus reducing the advantage they gain from the flank, but this will take time to get used to, and it may not be the best choice for everyone. For stage 2, there isn't quite as much help I can give. If you're using teamwork to your advantage, this will make the stage much easier and quicker. Other than that, just keep practicing and honing your raw talent. Finally, Stage 3. If you're losing at this point, consider trying to get away, benefiting your team, or trapping your chaser. If you are trying to run, keep in mind that tight corners and areas with multiple levels are the best for confusing enemies, even with radar. By benefiting your team, I usually refer to an objective game. If the oddball is right next to you and you're the last man alive, it would be a good idea to try to play ball, or throw it off the edge of the map, if possible. This gives your team time to respawn as the ball resets. If you're trying to kill the player chasing you, use grenades and melee attacks. Throw plasma grenades at your feet when you go through a doorway, or bounce a frag off the walls. These grenades will either kill the enemy, wipe out their shields, or at the least slow them down. Multiple paths right after a corner could provide an opportunity to assassinate a player as he comes around said corner. This is much like an episode of Scooby-Doo, but side note, don't pretend to be a barber or waiter. I've tested this out, and 9 times out of 10 the other player always sees through your disguise. Usually. If you're the person doing the chasing, just follow these tips, but in reverse. So watch out for grenades and barbers. That's all the information I have on my stage theory. If you're going to try to use my theory to your benefit, don't be discouraged if you can't pick out the different stages. It takes time to get used to this system, and is much easier and also useful if you review your game films keeping the 3 stages in mind. Also, I urge you to keep in mind that Halo 3 is a huge, complicated game. With 8 players in a game, the combat will get a little confusing to classify, and is often unclassifiable entirely. This video was merely to help inexperienced players to increase their skill, and veteran players to consider the gameplay on a larger scale. At the very least, I hope you had fun watching this video. See you later, YouTube.
Everybody sees me, but it's not that easy. Standing in the light field, waiting for some action, Oh, but why won't you come over here? Wow!